If you have ever wondered what it might be like if, say, Marjorie Taylor Greene became president of the United States, let me tell you that there is a real-life parallel where something like that happened. Ladies and gentlemen. Alright, so y'all probably... Is this the way my Paul's face looks? Like, it always looks like this? Alright, anyway, before we get into it, y'all probably need some more context.
Bolivia's former president of nearly 14 years is claiming he was ousted by a coup.
One of Latin America's most popular presidents, an indigenous union leader who introduced sweeping social reforms and economic growth to Bolivia.
What's interesting about this story is that unlike other countries in the region where leaders have been ousted, Bolivia has been doing well, right? The economy has been booming, poverty is down, income inequality is declining. So the question is, why did President Morales get pushed out of office?
Let me give you some background information. The most important thing you should know is that over half of the country's population is indigenous. In fact, it has the highest percentage of indigenous people of any country in South America. But before Evo Morales became president, it was basically an apartheid regime ruled by a minority of European descended landowners, some of whose lineage went all the way back to when it was a Spanish colony. The indigenous population lived in poverty and they faced a ton of racism.
They don't let them into the schools because they're peasants, Quechuas. The mestizos discriminate against us and even against other Indians who wear Western clothes so they can feel superior.
Before, when a peasant would walk into an office, they'd say, "What are you doing here, you Indian? You smell like a llama." A woman dressed in a polera was discriminated against. Now we go right into the presidential palace. Our president is an Amara. It shows we are not ignorant or inferior.
Things began to change in 2005 with the election of Morales, who became the country's first indigenous president, running for the movement toward socialism party. Side note, socialist leadership does not a socialist country make. The Portuguese Socialist Party has been the most predominant political party in the country since 1975, yet no one would call Portugal a socialist country. Like I mentioned a couple videos ago, when Morales came into power, he began nationalizing the country's oil and gas industries, as well as instituting land reforms which gave public and private land to indigenous communities with the intention of helping the country's most destitute citizens. Normally, when leftist governments in small countries try to do things like this, they're met with a coup, like in 1953 when Iran tried to nationalize their oil industry. Or September 11th, 1953, years after Allende instituted land reform, successfully dodged a coup, as well as staved off other more clandestine methods the CIA used to sabotage his regime. Morales managed to escape two coups early on, one in 2008 and another in 2009, and his policies were extremely successful. GDP is actually a really bad metric for measuring how good a country is doing, but if you like looking at it, he did manage to grow it by quite a bit. Much better metrics like reduction in poverty, reduction in infant mortality, and increase in wages versus inflation were all greatly improved, which led to things like the creation of a brand new bourgeois class of Aymara people. So how did a president go from winning 3 elections in a landslide and markedly improving the lives of their citizens to being asked to step down by their own military? Part of the reason was because he wanted to run for a 4th term, and the other part was racism. 51% of the country voted against a referendum to eliminate term limits, but in 2017 he was able to get the country's Supreme Court to eliminate term limits for him, which cleared the way for him to run again. Now, if you're thinking that he must have stacked the court with justices that were loyal to him, allow me to point out that in Bolivia, Supreme Court justices serve 6-year terms and they're elected by popular vote. And if you're from the United States like me, that probably sounds like heaven compared to the horror that we have to deal with. And if you're thinking that 4 or 5-year terms is too much, allow me to remind you that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president of the United States not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. And the only reason he didn't serve a full 16 years was because he died in office. People have a tendency to continue voting for leaders who are measurably improving their well-being. A more recent example of a leader who served for a long time would be Angela Merkel, who was Chancellor of Germany from 2005 to 2021. Now, it's not that the people thought that they were trapped in some sort of authoritarian socialist dictatorship or anything. They just wanted somebody else at the helm. In the same way that me not wanting Joe Biden to be president of the United States doesn't mean that I want the Republicans to take over. But going directly against the will of the people in 2019 led to him winning his 4th term with the lowest percentage of the popular vote ever. And that's when things got crazy. For an outright win of the presidential election in Bolivia, you either need 50% of the vote or at least 40% with a 10% lead over your closest competitor, otherwise it goes to a runoff. As you can see, the right-wing candidate running against Morales was nowhere near close to winning, but it was the closest the party had ever come in 15 14 years, so they took the opportunity to try to create chaos and steal power. Carlos Mensa was only trailing by about 7% of the vote towards the end of the night, which indicated that there might be a runoff. However, when a bunch of votes from rural areas heavily favoring Morales began being counted, he declared that there was some sort of fraud going on.
Millions and millions of people voted for us tonight, and a very sad group of people is trying to disenfranchise that group of people, and we won't stand for it. We will not stand for it.
The Organization of American States, a right-leaning US-backed organization, put out a report that said that there had been fraud in the election, which stoked the fires of Mensa's claims and led to nationwide protests. Acknowledging those claims, Morales called for a new election, but the military stepped in and strongly suggested he resign. But not just him, several other members in the line of succession were also asked to resign.
The day Evo Morales took exile in Mexico, opponents in the city of Cochabamba brought down the Huipala flag that represents indigenous pride and burnt it. A policeman cut out the symbol from his uniform.
Yo, it's me from my wonderful editing suite, which looks exactly like this and in no way, shape, or form resembles this. Yo, editing me. That in no way, shape, or form resembles this. That's your cue to take this off. We're just going to go with it. All right. I forgot to mention that the OAS report, which, by the way, the Organization of American States receives over half of its funding from the United States government. The report that they issued that said that there was fraud was widely inaccurate, and it was debunked months later by several different organizations. So the whole thing about there being some sort of fraud was inaccurate. Morales won that election. Now, if you have ever wondered what it might be like if, say, Marjorie Taylor Greene were to become president of the United States, well, let me tell you, there is a real-life parallel of something like that happening. Atención, les presento Jeanine Añez. Jeanine was the second vice president of the Senate, and she took advantage of the power vacuum to declare herself president of the country. She was no stranger to making racist tweets about the country's indigenous population, claiming their culture was satanic, and she marched into the Capitol holding a gigantic Bible, claiming that the Bible had come back to Bolivia. On her first day in office, she named a new cabinet void of any indigenous members, as well as new military leadership loyal to her, and gave them all immunity from criminal prosecution for any actions taken in the line of duty. This almost immediately led to 2 massacres when the military fired live ammunition into groups of people who had come out to protest the new government and demand new elections, as well as just passers-by who weren't involved in the protest at all. It didn't stop Forbes from putting her on the cover of a magazine, though. She was only supposed to be a caretaker president to arrange a new set of elections within 90 days, but the right-wing government knew that they would never win that election, so they continued to delay as long as possible and stayed in power for a year. In addition to killing protesters, they also went after journalists and political opponents, one of which was Morales' old chief of staff, who was charged with terrorism and put into detention without access to medical care while she was pregnant, which caused her to miscarry. They tried to fight the coronavirus by having priests sprinkle holy water out of helicopters flying over different cities. They tried to privatize different state-run industries, which definitely piqued the interest of one particular Nepo baby who definitely doesn't want anyone to know that his father used to own an emerald mine, because Bolivia has the world's richest supply of lithium, and that Nepo baby's most popular business requires a lot of lithium. Against consent of the Assembly, Jeanine also took out a $346 million loan from the International Monetary Fund, and if you know anything about the IMF, it's that those loans have a nasty habit of hurting countries more than they help them. This is because of conditions they can impose on the way their borrowers can govern their countries, forcing them to cut back on public expenditures of things like medical care, or pricing controls for food, or consumer subsidies for energy. These controls often affect the poor and working class more, leading to more inequality and a higher rate of poverty. For example, in 2014, they pressured Ukraine to cut consumer subsidies, which led to a 50% increase in gas prices for their citizens. Fortunately, the full amount of that loan was paid off in 2021 with interest by Bolivia's new president, Luis Arce, and Jeanine ended up like a few other people that have made the cover of Forbes, in jail.
Hey, Doe, I just wanted to let you know jail's not that bad.
This is due to the incredible perseverance of the Bolivian people, who took their lives into their hands and went out to protest against the regime that was trying to steal their country away from them. They forced that government to hold new elections, and they turned out in droves to vote for their chosen candidate, who won in a landslide, much to the chagrin of a certain aforementioned Nepo baby. Another day, a different gray shirt. Alright, so why did I make this video? A couple of weeks ago, I made a video about immigration immigration and how the imperialism of the United States has definitely played a hand in causing some of the poverty and turmoil that you see represented across South and Central America and the Caribbean. A quick scan of this infographic as well as this article about what countries people are fleeing from are being represented at the US-Mexico border is kind of an undeniable link. But Bolivia is different. Their leftist government actually stayed alive long enough for us to see tangible results on their policies, and they appear to have worked quite well. Now that's not to say that Bolivia doesn't have problems, it definitely does, but it is to say that their solutions seem to have worked a lot better than let the rich businessmen do whatever they want to do. It's also an incredible story of collective action. Those people literally had their country hijacked, taken away from them, and through their resilience and them taking their lives into their hands and going out there and protesting that government, they forced their usurpers to give them their country back. Anyways, thanks for watching. Leave me a comment and let me know what you thought. Aside from subscribing and following, if you want to further support me, there are ways you can do that on the screen right now, and I'll catch you on the next one. Ciao.